The afternoon sun blazed mercilessly over Ouagadougou, casting sharp shadows across the dusty streets of the ancient city. The marketplace hummed with its usual vibrant chaos, vendors calling out their wares, children weaving through the crowds, women haggling over prices, and men gathered in small circles engaged in animated conversation. Colorful fruits gleamed under makeshift awnings, fresh bread filled the air with its warm aroma, and roasted peanuts crackled in iron pans. Life flowed with its customary rhythm, yet today there was an unmistakable undercurrent of tension rippling through the crowd. "The French are coming," people whispered to one another, the words spreading like wildfire through every corner of the city. "The French delegation will be here today." Some faces lit up with cautious optimism. "Perhaps this will improve our country's relations with the world," an elderly merchant suggested, adjusting the weights on his scale. Others frowned with worry. "How will these foreigners speak to us?" a young woman asked her companion. "Will they show us respect, or will they look down on us as they always have?" The question hung in the air, unanswered but deeply felt. In every heart, there was an invisible restlessness, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension about what this visit would bring. Suddenly, the distant rumble of engines cut through the marketplace chatter. All heads turned toward the main road as a convoy of gleaming black vehicles appeared, their tinted windows reflecting the harsh sunlight. The cars moved slowly through the crowd, which parted reluctantly to let them pass. Children clapped their hands in excitement at the spectacle, but most adults stood silently, their expressions guarded and watchful. The convoy came to a halt in the central square, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then, from the largest vehicle, emerged a tall, slender woman whose very bearing commanded attention. Her golden hair was pulled back in a severe, precise style. Her tailored suit spoke of expensive European fashion, completely out of place in the dusty heat of Ouagadougou. Her face wore what could only be described as a cold, calculated smile, the kind that never quite reached the eyes. This was Madame Lucille Moreau, head of the French delegation. She stepped onto the ground as if it were beneath her, her high heels clicking sharply against the stones. Her walk radiated arrogance, her chin held high, her gaze fixed straight ahead. She did not glance at the children who had gathered to see her. She did not smile at the vendors who paused in their work. She did not acknowledge the women who watched from doorways. Her eyes swept over the crowd as if they were nothing more than shadows, insignificant background to her important mission. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. "Who does this woman think she is?" an old man muttered to his neighbor. "Look at her face. Pure arrogance," a woman replied, shaking her head. "She comes to our land and cannot even spare a smile for our children?" Inside the palace, President Ibrahim Traoré waited to receive his guests. Though young, he possessed an uncommon dignity and patience that commanded respect far beyond his years. He was known throughout the land as a leader who genuinely loved his people, who listened carefully to the wisdom of elders, and who placed justice above all other considerations in every decision he made. As Madame Moreau entered the palace hall, her assistant leaned close to her. She spoke in French, assuming no one would understand, but her voice carried farther than she realized. "What an old and plain building this is," she remarked with barely concealed disdain. Several palace attendants heard these words. Their faces flushed with anger, but they remained silent, maintaining their composure with effort. They had been trained to show hospitality even to the rudest guests. When Madame Moreau was brought before President Traoré, she extended her hand for a perfunctory handshake. Her smile remained fixed and artificial. "I hope, Mr. President, that you are ready to learn something today," she said, her tone patronizing, as if speaking to a child rather than a head of state. The room fell silent. Every person present turned to look at the president, waiting to see how he would respond to such blatant disrespect. The tension was palpable. One could almost hear the collective holding of breath. President Traoré's expression did not change. He smiled gently and replied in a calm, measured voice, "Madame, we have a saying here. The river does not announce its own depth, But those who are careless may drown in it. Madame Moreau's smile faltered slightly. She did not understand the proverb, but something in the president's tone made her uneasy. She nodded vaguely and took her seat, dismissing the words as meaningless local folklore. But the people in the room understood perfectly. They exchanged knowing glances with one another. The president's patience was not weakness, it was a message. His calmness was not submission, it was strength. And everyone present knew that they were about to witness something extraordinary. The official welcoming ceremony began with traditional music and dance. Women sang songs that had been passed down through generations, their voices harmonizing in ways that seemed to reach into the very soul. Drums pounded out ancient rhythms that made the heart beat faster. Children danced with flowers in their hands, their movements telling stories older than memory. Throughout the performance, Madame Moreau sat stiffly in her chair, visibly uncomfortable. She fanned herself repeatedly, though whether from the heat or from irritation was unclear. She leaned toward her assistant and spoke again in French, assuming privacy. What strange customs these are. Why aren't they speaking? Why all this noise and dancing? I came here for serious discussions, not entertainment. Once more her words were overheard. Once more those who understood remained silent. But their eyes spoke volumes. After the ceremony, President Traoré approached Madame Moreau with his characteristic gentle courtesy. Madame, if I may, I would like to show you something of our country beyond these palace walls. I believe you will find it enlightening. Madame Moreau agreed, though her expression suggested she expected to be bored. She climbed back into her vehicle, and the convoy set out once more, this time heading toward a rural village on the outskirts of the city. As they drove, the landscape changed. The urban sprawl gave way to scattered houses, then to open fields, and finally to a small village where mud brick homes clustered around a central square. A massive old tree provided shade in the center, and beneath it, life unfolded at a slower, more ancient pace. The vehicles stopped, and the president led Madame Moreau to a raised platform under the tree. Villagers had gathered, curious about their visitor but maintaining a respectful distance. The president gestured for Madame Moreau to sit on a woven mat beside him. Nearby, an elderly woman sat cross-legged on the ground, weaving a basket from dried reeds. Her hands trembled with age, but her movements were sure and practiced. Her eyes, though clouded, held a deep peace. "Grandmother," the president said respectfully, using the honorific that showed his regard for her wisdom, "we have a guest who has come from far away. Perhaps you would share a story with her?" The old woman looked up, her gaze settling on Madame Moreau with a penetrating clarity that made the Frenchwoman uncomfortable. Then she began to speak, her voice cracked but strong. "There was once a peacock who was very proud of his beautiful feathers. He strutted through the forest, showing off his magnificent tail to all the other birds. He looked down on the smaller birds, calling them plain and worthless. 'Look at me,' he would say. 'I am the greatest of all creatures. My feathers shine like jewels. What are you compared to me?' The other birds grew tired of the peacock's arrogance, but they said nothing. They simply went about their business, finding food, building nests, and singing their songs. Then one day, the rains came. Heavy, relentless rains that soaked everything. The peacock's beautiful feathers became waterlogged and heavy. He tried to fly, but he could not lift himself off the ground. The weight of his own pride had trapped him. A small sparrow, one of the birds the peacock had mocked, saw his struggle. Without hesitation, the sparrow flew down and guided the peacock to shelter under a large leaf. There, protected from the rain, the peacock's feathers slowly dried. When the storm passed, the peacock looked at the little sparrow with new eyes. "Why did you help me?" he asked. "I was cruel to you." "I called you worthless," the sparrow replied. "Pride is a burden that weighs you down. Compassion is a strength that lifts you up. I helped you because that is what community means. We support one another, regardless of who has the brightest feathers." From that day forward, the peacock was changed. He learned that true greatness comes not from what you possess, but from how you treat others. The villagers who had gathered around applauded softly, nodding their heads in agreement. Children laughed and clapped their hands. But Madame Moreau wrinkled her nose in irritation. "Why are you telling me fairy tales?" she demanded. "I did not come here for children's stories and moral lessons. I came for serious political discussions." President Traoré turned to her with his gentle smile still in place. "Madame, our wisdom lives in these stories. They are not mere entertainment. They are how we pass down the truths we have learned through centuries of experience. Those who listen with their hearts rather than just their ears can recognize the reality within them." Before Madame Moreau could respond, a young girl approached, no more than 7 or 8 years old. In her trembling hands, she carried a simple clay cup filled with cool water. She walked slowly, careful not to spill a drop, her face serious with concentration. "Madame," the child said, her voice shaking slightly but her tone proud, "this water is for you. Welcome to our village." Madame Moreau looked at the cup with barely concealed disgust. It was rough clay, handmade, nothing like the fine crystal she was accustomed to. The water was not bottled, not purified by modern processes. She started to wave the child away. "Wait," President Traoré said quietly. "In our culture, when a child offers you water, it is considered a gift of life itself. To refuse would be a profound insult, not just to the child, but to the entire community." All eyes in the village turned to Madame Moreau. The moment stretched out, tense and uncomfortable. She felt the weight of their collective gaze, felt the judgment in their silence. She knew that her next action would define this entire visit. Slowly, reluctantly, she reached out and took the cup from the child's hands. She raised it to her lips and took a single sip. The water was cool and clean, tasting of minerals and earth. The village erupted in celebration. Drums began to beat. Women broke into joyful song. Children danced around the square. The little girl who had offered the water beamed with pride, and several adults patted her head affectionately. For the first time since her arrival, a crack appeared in Madame Moreau's carefully constructed facade. She looked around at the celebration, at these people who had so little material wealth yet seemed rich in something she could not quite name. A thought occurred to her, unbidden and unwelcome. Could it be that their simplicity is actually their strength? President Traoré leaned toward her and spoke softly, so only she could hear. "You have accepted the water, madame. But respect cannot be drunk like water. It must be earned through winning hearts, not through displays of power." The words struck her deeply, piercing through layers of pride and prejudice. For just a moment she met the president's eyes and saw not defiance or weakness, but a profound dignity that shook her to her core. This moment marked the beginning of the crumbling of her arrogance. The platform under the great tree became a stage for competing energies, the noise of celebration, and the silence of internal struggle. Drums pounded, children shouted with joy, women sang songs of welcome, and yet beneath it all, Madame Moreau sat in turmoil. She kept looking at the simple clay cup in her hands as if it were a mirror reflecting truths she did not want to see. President Ibrahim Traoré let the celebration continue for a time, then raised his hand. Immediately, the music softened and the crowd quieted, demonstrating a respect and unity that came from genuine affection rather than fear. "Madame," the president said, "you have accepted our water and joined in our simple celebration. Now I must ask you, will you also accept the dignity of our people?" The question landed like a hammer blow. It was not aggressive, not confrontational, but it demanded an answer. Madame Moreau's eyes darted away, unable to hold the president's steady gaze. She felt the crack in her pride widen. Before she could formulate a response, an elderly farmer stood up from the crowd. His clothes were patched and worn, his hands gnarled from decades of working the soil. But he spoke with quiet authority. "Our homes may be made of mud," he said, his voice carrying across the square, "but our hearts are strong. We may be poor in the things that rust and decay, but we are rich in dignity. And dignity, honored guest, is the most precious treasure that exists. It cannot be bought. It cannot be stolen. It can only be given and received through mutual respect." The crowd erupted in agreement, voices rising in a chant. "Dignity is our wealth. Respect is our strength." The noise overwhelmed Madame Moreau. She felt trapped, suffocated by the simple truth in these people's words. She wanted to leave, to return to the air-conditioned palace, to escape this uncomfortable confrontation with her own prejudices. But President Traoré was not finished with her education. "Come," he said, rising to his feet and extending his hand. "There is more I would like you to see." They walked to the shade of another large tree, where a teacher sat surrounded by children. The children sat cross-legged in the dirt, their attention completely focused on the teacher's words. No desks, no books, no technology, just ancient knowledge being passed from one generation to the next. The teacher was telling a story. There was once a mighty lion who ruled over all the animals of the savannah. He was strong and fierce, and all creatures feared him. He believed his strength made him the most important animal in all the land. One day, a hunter came to the savannah with a net. The lion, confident in his power, did not notice the trap. When he stepped forward to drink from the watering hole, the net fell over him. The more he struggled, the more entangled he became. The other animals heard his roars and came to see. The lion called out to them, "Free me! I am your king! You must obey me!" But the animals remembered how the lion had treated them. They remembered his pride and his cruelty. They turned away, leaving him to his fate. Then a small rabbit appeared. The rabbit, whom the lion had once mocked for being weak and insignificant, approached the net. With sharp teeth and patient work, the rabbit gnawed through the ropes until the lion was free. The lion was ashamed. "Why did you save me?" he asked. "I was cruel to you." "I called you worthless," the rabbit replied. "True strength is not in muscles or roars. True strength is in the heart and in the courage to help others, even when they do not deserve it. Today I am strong and you are weak. Tomorrow it may be reversed. This is why we must always treat others with dignity." The children's eyes shone with understanding. They clapped their hands and repeated the lesson. "Dignity for all. Strength in kindness." Madame Moreau found herself unexpectedly moved. These simple stories, told under a tree in the dirt, contained profound wisdom. These people, whom she had considered backward and uneducated, understood fundamental truths about human nature that many of her sophisticated colleagues in Paris had forgotten, or perhaps never learned. President Traoré watched her carefully, reading the subtle changes in her expression. "These are our schools, madame," he said. "Here, knowledge is passed down through stories and lived experiences. This wisdom gives us our dignity. It reminds us of who we are and what we value. No amount of wealth or technology can replace it." Madame Moreau's heart felt heavy. She was beginning to understand that true civilization might not be measured in skyscrapers and stock markets, but in the values reflected in the eyes of these children. At that moment, a young woman approached carrying a basket filled with corn and nuts. She presented it to Madame Moreau with both hands, bowing slightly. "These are the gifts of our land," the woman said. "Please accept them as a token of hospitality." Madame Moreau's hands trembled as she reached for the basket. To refuse would be an insult, but to accept felt like a surrender, an acknowledgement that she needed something from these people she had come to patronize. President Traoré spoke softly. "Our land may not give us wealth by your standards, but it gives us authenticity and connection. To reject these gifts is to reject the spirit of the people who offer them. It is to reject your own humanity." Slowly, Madame Moreau took the basket. Her hands closed around the woven handles, feeling their rough texture. The weight of the basket seemed to carry more than corn and nuts. It carried centuries of tradition, community, and shared human dignity. The villagers cheered. For the first time since arriving in Ouagadougou, Madame Moreau felt something shift inside her. The walls of pride that had protected her for so long began to crumble. Emotions she had kept locked away for years began to surface. Vulnerability, humility, connection. President Traoré knew this was just the beginning. He wanted to show Madame Moreau one more thing, something that would change her forever. On the journey back to the palace, Madame Moreau sat silently by the window, watching the landscape roll past. The mud houses and dusty roads that had seemed so primitive to her just hours ago now appeared different. She saw strength in them, resilience, continuity, a refusal to be broken by hardship. For the first time, a radical thought entered her mind. Perhaps these people are richer than we are. They have dignity and peace. What do we have? Wealth that breeds anxiety, power that breeds loneliness. President Traoré noticed the change in her demeanor and allowed himself a small smile. The first battle had been won, but he knew the war was not yet over. Pride dies hard, especially pride built over a lifetime. Upon returning to the palace, the president did not waste time. He called his advisors together and explained his plan. Madame Moreau's heart has been touched, but her pride still stands. We must show her the true source of our strength. Tomorrow, we will show her what unity looks like. We will show her that power does not come from thrones, but from the hearts of the people. News of the events in the village spread through the city that evening. In marketplaces and coffee houses, people discussed what had happened. Some praised the president's patience and wisdom. Others wondered what would happen next. Young people laughed and speculated about how the proud French woman was handling her lessons in humility. The next morning, President Traoré invited Madame Moreau to visit the central school in the capital city. She initially declined, but her pride compelled her to accept. She could not let it be said that she had refused. When they arrived at the school, they were greeted by children in colorful uniforms who recited poetry and performed dances. Madame Moreau watched with growing bewilderment. These children seemed genuinely happy, despite their school's lack of sophisticated technology and resources. Why are they so joyful? She asked the president. They have so little. Joy does not come from possessions, madame. It comes from dignity and peace. It comes from feeling valued and respected. In one classroom, a boy stood up to ask a question. He spoke directly to the president with no fear or hesitation. Mr. President, yesterday when this woman insulted our country, why didn't you scold her? Why were you so patient? Every eye turned to President Traoré. Madame Moreau felt her face flush with shame. The child's innocent directness had exposed her behavior in a way that no adult confrontation could have. The president smiled at the boy and replied, "My young friend, if you fight fire with fire, the flames only grow larger. But if you pour water on fire, it is extinguished. We responded to disrespect with respect to show the world the true power of patience and dignity. Violence and anger are easy. Peace and understanding require real strength." The boy nodded thoughtfully, satisfied with the answer. But Madame Moreau's heart pounded in her chest. She had been exposed, her arrogance named and examined by a child's pure observation. After the school visit, the president took her to the local hospital. It was a simple building, clearly under-resourced, but the doctors and nurses worked with dedication and compassion. An elderly patient recognized the president and reached out to grasp his hand. "Our president never abandons us," the old man said, tears in his eyes. "Even in our sickness, we know he cares for us." Whispers of agreement spread through the hospital corridor. Madame Moreau was stunned. In her country, political leaders were often criticized and mocked. Yet here, people were willing to give their lives for their president. What kind of power was this? "Power does not come from weapons or wealth," President Traoré explained, reading her thoughts. "It comes from building trust. It comes from giving respect rather than demanding it." Madame Moreau's lips felt dry. She remembered the cutting words she had spoken when she first arrived, and shame washed over her. On the return journey, they passed through a busy street where people recognized the president's vehicle. Spontaneously, crowds gathered, chanting his name, offering blessings, waving and smiling. Children ran alongside the car, laughing with pure joy. Every face showed pride and affection. Madame Moreau understood then that this kind of respect could not be bought with any amount of money. Back at the palace, President Traoré turned to her and said, "Today you saw the second dimension of our strength. Tomorrow I will show you the third. Then the choice will be yours. What will you tell the world about us?" Madame Moreau retreated to her room in silence. The foundations of her pride were crumbling. That night, sleep eluded Madame Moreau completely. She paced her room for hours, her mind replaying the day's events. She saw the schoolchild's questioning face. She heard the elderly patient's devotion. She felt the weight of the clay cup in her hands. The words of the stories she had heard cut through her pride like knives. She stood before the mirror, examining herself. Her expensive blue suit, her carefully applied makeup, her styled hair, all the armor of her professional identity. But the confidence that had always sustained her was gone, replaced by doubt and self-examination. "Have I been wrong all this time?" she whispered to her reflection. "Have I allowed pride to blind me to what truly matters?" The next morning, President Traoré announced that Madame Moreau would be taken to the central marketplace. She hesitated, but something in her had shifted. She found herself saying yes. The convoy entered the bustling market where life pulsed with energy and color. Vendors called out their wares. Customers haggled good-naturedly. Children darted between stalls, and the air filled with the scents of spices, fresh bread, and roasting meat. President Traoré stopped beside a modest stall where a middle-aged man sold peanuts. The man's shoes were worn and patched, but his eyes sparkled with vitality and pride. When he saw the president, he bowed respectfully and said, "Mr. President, you built the road that allows me to bring my goods to the city easily. This has changed my family's life. We can now afford to send my daughter to school. This is my wealth, my gratitude." Madame Moreau was astonished. This man was grateful for something so simple, a road. In her world, such basic infrastructure was taken for granted. Why was he so thankful? Dignity is not granted through grand gestures, President Traoré explained. It comes through consistent attention to people's genuine needs. It comes from pure intentions, not from seeking credit or praise. Just then, a woman approached, holding her young son's hand. The boy wore a school uniform that was clearly secondhand but clean and carefully mended. "My son goes to school now because you eliminated the fees," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "He will read and write. He will become someone important. This is our true freedom, not handouts, but opportunity through dignity." Tears gleamed in the woman's eyes, but her face shone with pride. Madame Moreau felt her feet grow heavy, as if the weight of these simple truths was pulling her down to earth after a lifetime of floating above reality. In her own country, she thought, people only criticized their leaders. But here, despite poverty, people blessed their president. The contrast was stark and undeniable. President Traoré led her to where a storyteller entertained a group of children. The old man was telling a tale about a mountain and a spring. There was once a great mountain who believed himself the most important feature of the landscape. He looked down on the tiny spring that bubbled at his base, dismissing it as insignificant. "I am mighty and eternal," the mountain proclaimed. "I touch the clouds. What are you compared to me?" The spring said nothing, just continued flowing quietly, feeding the valley below. One day, fire erupted from within the mountain, a volcano that began to destroy everything. The mountain, in his pride, had not noticed the danger building inside himself. As lava flowed and rocks crumbled, the mountain began to fall apart. The tiny spring, however, brought forth its waters in greater abundance. The cool water met the hot lava and cooled it, preventing complete devastation. The spring saved the valley and, in doing so, saved the mountain from complete destruction. The mountain learned humility that day. He understood that true greatness lies not in size or height, but in service to others. The children clapped enthusiastically, shouting the moral, "Service makes us great! Pride makes us fall!" Madame Moreau recognized herself in the story of the proud mountain. The parallel was too obvious to miss. As they prepared to leave the market, people gathered around President Traoré chanting, "Our dignity lives in our president. Our unity is our strength." The sound washed over Madame Moreau like a wave. She finally understood that this kind of love could not be purchased with any amount of wealth. It came only through service, sacrifice, and genuine care for people's well-being. Back at the palace, President Traoré said to her, "Today you heard the voice of the people. Madame, respect does not come from sitting on thrones. It lives in hearts, earned through actions, not demanded through power." Madame Moreau had no response. That night she opened her window and gazed at the stars above Ouagadougou. For the first time in her adult life, she admitted to herself that true strength does not come from wealth or military might. It comes from the respect that people freely give to those who genuinely serve them. Her eyes filled with moisture. and her heart trembled with the fear that she had been on the wrong path her entire life. The following morning brought a different atmosphere to Ouagadougou. The previous day's events had become legend, spreading through the city with additions and embellishments. People spoke of the president's wisdom and the Frenchwoman's humbling with satisfaction and pride. President Traoré knew that one day of transformation was not enough. Lasting change required sustained impact. He decided to show Madame Moreau the farmers in their fields, the backbone of any society. The convoy left the city, driving along dusty roads until they reached the agricultural lands surrounding Ouagadougou. Under the intense sun, farmers worked their fields, planting seeds with practiced precision. Women carried water in large clay pots balanced on their heads. Children played between the rows of growing crops, their laughter carrying across the fields. When President Traoré's vehicle stopped, the farmers paused in their work and began to chant his name. An elderly farmer approached, his clothes stained with soil, but his bearing proud and dignified. "Mr. President," the man said, his weathered face breaking into a smile, "you built the irrigation canal that brings water to our fields. Our crops no longer die from drought. Our children no longer go hungry. This is not charity, this is love for your people." The gathered farmers applauded enthusiastically. Madame Moreau watched in continued amazement. These people who had so little material wealth expressed such profound gratitude and respect. How did they live this way? "These farmers are our pride," President Traoré said. "They grow dignity from the soil itself. They understand what truly matters in life." An old grandmother approached, carrying her young grandson on her shoulders. She set the boy down gently and spoke. "This child attended school yesterday, and today he plays in the fields. We want him to value education, but also to respect the land that feeds him. We want him to learn dignity, how to give it and how to receive it." The words struck Madame Moreau like lightning. She thought of children in her own country, raised to compete ruthlessly, to pursue wealth and status above all else. What kind of adults would they become? What had been lost in the pursuit of material success? President Traoré bent down and scooped up a handful of earth. He held it out, letting it slowly sift through his fingers. "This soil gives us bread and dignity," he said quietly, "but only to those who respect it, those who care for it, those who understand that we are not separate from the land, we are part of it." For the first time, Madame Moreau reached out and touched the soil herself. Her expensive manicure was immediately ruined, dirt coating her fingers. But instead of recoiling in disgust as she would have just days before, she felt something else, a connection, a grounding, as if she were reconnecting with something fundamental she had lost long ago. As they prepared to leave, the farmers gathered and began chanting once more, "Dignity grows from our soil. Dignity lives in our president." Drums began to beat, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to connect earth and sky. Children danced and clapped. Madame Moreau watched from the window of the vehicle, and for the first time she thought, "These are the richest people in the world. They have what money cannot buy. They have dignity." Back at the palace, President Traoré said, "Madam, today you saw that our strength does not come from weapons or gold. It comes from the hands that plant seeds in the earth. These hands build dignity. They are the foundation of everything we are." Madame Moreau bowed her head and walked away in silence. A storm raged inside her heart. "I came here to look down on these people," she thought. "But true greatness belongs to them, not to me." That night she gazed at the stars from her window. The lights of simple homes twinkled across the city below. She understood finally that dignity comes not from wealth, but from authenticity and service. Morning light streamed through the palace windows. Madame Moreau's face still showed exhaustion and inner turmoil. Her reflection in the mirror remained the same, expensive clothing, professional appearance, but the shine of arrogance had completely vanished. Each day, she felt another wall inside her crumble. President Ibrahim Traoré had designed his program carefully. He knew it was time to show Madame Moreau the place where sacrifice was honored and unity was embodied. This was the martyrs' field, where those who had given their lives for freedom were buried. "Madame," he said, This is our truest treasure, the most precious wealth of our land. The convoy traveled to a vast open field on the outskirts of the city. The space was filled with an extraordinary silence that somehow resonated more loudly than any noise. Marble headstones stood in neat rows, each adorned with fresh flowers. Birds sang in nearby trees, and the wind whispered through the grass, creating an atmosphere of profound reverence. President Traoré stopped beside one particular grave. This was a farmer, he explained, who sold his land to buy food for our soldiers during the War of Independence. He went hungry himself so that his people could be fed. He sacrificed his own security so that his nation could be free. He moved to another headstone. This was a teacher who died protecting her students when the school was attacked. She placed her body between the children in danger, giving her life so that they might live. Madame Moreau felt tears forming in her eyes. How could she have considered these people inferior? A nation that produced such sacrifice, such selflessness, such profound love for community. How could such a nation be dismissed as backward? A small boy approached, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. He placed them carefully on one of the graves. "Mr. President," the child said solemnly, "these flowers are for my grandfather. He always told me that dignity is the greatest wealth a person can possess." President Traoré placed his hand gently on the boy's head. "Your grandfather taught you well, my son. Life without dignity is meaningless. Everything else, wealth, power, possessions, these fade away. But dignity remains forever." Madame Moreau's heart trembled. These were not empty words or political rhetoric. These were truths written in blood and sacrifice, passed down through generations, lived out every single day. "Madame," President Traoré said, turning to face her directly, "you view the world through the lens of power and wealth. We view it through the lens of dignity and sacrifice. This is what gives us our strength. This is what makes us who we are." Madame Moreau remained silent, her eyes lowered, her heart breaking under the weight of understanding. As they prepared to leave the martyrs' field, President Traoré said, "There is one more thing I want you to see before your time here ends." The convoy traveled to a large village where a gathering had been organized. Drums beat and traditional instruments played as people assembled. When President Traoré arrived, the crowd erupted in celebration. "Our dignity lives in our president. Our unity is our strength." Madame Moreau felt tears streaming down her face. These people with so little material wealth were so rich in spirit. The contrast with her own world, where abundance bred dissatisfaction and cynicism, could not have been starker. That evening, back at the palace, she stood by the window looking out over the city. The lights of modest homes glowed warmly in the darkness. She whispered to herself, "I came here to teach them, but they have taught me. What have I truly achieved in my life? Wealth, power, or merely pride?" In the silence of the night, her heart answered, "True wealth is dignity. And these people are infinitely richer than I am." The next morning marked a new chapter in this unfolding story. Madame Moreau had tossed and turned all night, caught between her old pride and the new understanding growing within her. She knew that President Ibrahim Traoré was defeating her in the most profound way possible, not through aggression or humiliation, but through demonstration of a better path. The president sent word that he wanted to show her something he called our true identity, unity. The convoy set out once more, and along the route, Madame Moreau witnessed something that astounded her. People lined the roads, not forced or commanded, but voluntarily gathering to see their president pass. Women held up their children, pointing and saying, "That is your leader. That is the man who serves our people." This love cannot be bought, Madame Moreau thought. It cannot be manufactured or commanded. It grows only from genuine service. After traveling for some time, they arrived at an enormous field where an astonishing sight awaited. Thousands of people had gathered. Farmers, laborers, merchants, teachers, mothers with babies, elderly men and women, children of all ages. Every hand held a flag. Every eye shone with pride and purpose. The entire nation seemed to have become a single voice. Drums thundered across the field. People chanted in perfect unison, "Dignity is our identity. Unity is our strength." Madame Moreau's heart raced. She remembered official gatherings in her own country, where people attended out of obligation, where crowds were managed and controlled, where genuine enthusiasm was rare. But here, everyone moved as one, spoke as one, believed as one. "How is this possible?" she asked, almost to herself. President Traoré heard her question and answered, "Because we have given our people dignity. When people receive genuine respect, when they know their leaders truly serve them, they will give their lives if necessary. Unity cannot be forced. It must be earned." An elderly man stepped forward from the crowd. He walked with the aid of a wooden staff, but his eyes blazed with passion and clarity. "We built this nation with our blood and sweat," he declared, his voice carrying across the field. "We fought for freedom when we had nothing but our determination. And now, this president gives us the dignity we only dreamed of. He treats us not as subjects to be ruled, but as partners in building our future. This is why we stand united. This is why we are strong." The crowd roared its approval, voices rising in a thunderous affirmation that seemed to shake the very ground. Madame Moreau trembled. For the first time in her life, she understood that true power has nothing to do with weapons or money. True power lives in the connection between hearts, in the bonds of mutual respect and shared purpose. President Traoré gently took her arm and led her into the midst of the crowd. People pressed close, not threatening but welcoming, their faces open and proud. "Madame," the president said, "this is the strength that no colonial power can break. These people would rather starve than compromise their dignity. They have learned through centuries of struggle that dignity is more precious than gold." Madame Moreau looked around at the thousands of faces surrounding her. She saw no hatred in their eyes despite her earlier arrogance. Instead, she saw dignity and an unspoken question. "Will you respect us, or will you continue to look down on us?" This was the decisive moment. In the depths of her heart, Madame Moreau finally surrendered. She acknowledged that her pride could not survive contact with this profound truth. "I came to teach," she thought, "but I have become the student." As the gathering concluded, children ran toward President Traoré with exuberant joy. One little girl broke away from the group and took Madame Moreau's hand. "Auntie," the child said with innocent directness, "now you won't call us inferior anymore, will you?" The words pierced Madame Moreau's heart like a dagger. Tears flooded her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. She knelt down to the child's level and kissed her forehead. President Traoré spoke softly. "This is our true victory, Madame. When even our enemy's heart melts before the innocence of our children, we know we have truly won. Not through violence, but through dignity." On the drive back to the palace, Madame Moreau sat in complete silence. She gazed out the window, and everything looked different now. The mud houses, the dusty roads, the simple market stalls, all of it appeared precious and meaningful. Every grain of dust seemed to tell a story of dignity and perseverance. For the first time in her adult life, she wished she could learn to give her own people the kind of respect she had witnessed here in Ouagadougou. That night, alone in her room, she opened her journal and wrote, "I came to this country to demonstrate power and superiority. But I have learned that true power lies in dignity and unity. These people are not poor. They are the richest people in the world. They possess wealth that money cannot buy, the wealth of the heart, the wealth of community, the wealth of mutual respect. I have been humbled not by force, but by truth. I have been defeated not by weapons, but by wisdom. I have been changed not by commands, but by example. What we call civilization in Europe, our technology, our wealth, our institutions, all of this is hollow if it lacks the fundamental human dignity I have witnessed here. We have so much, yet we are so poor in the things that truly matter. These people, who have suffered under colonialism, who have fought for freedom, who continue to struggle with poverty, have maintained something we have lost: their humanity, their connection to each other, their understanding that dignity is the foundation of all genuine human progress. I will never forget what I have learned here. When I return to France, I will be a different person. Whether I can change my country's policies remains to be seen, but at least I can change myself. At least I can tell this story. At least I can bear witness to the truth I have discovered." The night in Ouagadougou deepened, quiet and profound. In the palace courtyard, lamps burned softly. But in Madame Lucille Moreau's heart, a different kind of light had been kindled. The light of understanding, the light of humility, the light of transformation. There came a knock at her door. President Ibrahim Traoré entered, carrying an old, carefully preserved letter in his hands. "Madame," he said gently, "a farmer gave me this letter some months ago. He asked me to read it to you if the opportunity arose. I believe now is the right moment." Madame Moreau looked up with curiosity and nodded for him to continue. The president unfolded the letter and began to read. "Mr. President, we have lived our entire lives in poverty. Our homes are simple. Our possessions are few. But we have never felt shame because we have our dignity. No wealthy nation can give us what we already possess. No amount of money can purchase our dreams or our integrity. We want the world to know us for our land, our labor, and our dignity. We do not want pity. We do not want to be looked down upon. We want respect, the respect that every human being deserves simply by virtue of being human. When foreign visitors come to our country, they see our lack of material wealth and assume we have nothing. But they are blind to what we truly possess. We have community. We have tradition. We have values that have sustained us through centuries of hardship. Tell them, Mr. President, that we are not waiting to be saved. We are building our own future, in our own way, according to our own values. Tell them that dignity cannot be imported or exported. It must be cultivated from within, through respect, through service, through genuine care for one another." President Traoré folded the letter carefully and looked at Madame Moreau. Her face was wet with tears. "Madame," he said quietly, "this is the voice of my people. They do not want charity or condescension. They want to be recognized as equals in the human family." Madame Moreau's lips trembled as she spoke. "Mr. President, I came to your country blinded by the arrogance of my nation's power. I looked down on your people, considered them backward and in need of enlightenment. But I see now that true greatness belongs to them, not to me. They are far richer than we are, because they possess what we have lost. Authentic human dignity." President Traoré smiled gently. "Madame, it is never too late to learn. The greatest wealth a human being possesses is the ability to recognize error and learn from it. You have shown that capacity today. That takes courage." The following day, President Traoré invited Madame Moreau to share a meal with school children in a modest village school. When she arrived, she found children sitting on woven mats spread on the bare ground. Before them were simple clay bowls containing rice and vegetables. Nothing fancy, nothing elaborate, just honest food honestly shared. As the president sat down among the children, they bowed respectfully and said in unison, "Mr. President, you honor us with your presence. This is our greatest joy." Madame Moreau stood frozen, watching this scene. These children had so little, yet they radiated happiness and pride. The contrast with children in wealthy nations, who had everything yet often seemed dissatisfied, struck her forcefully. President Traoré gestured for her to sit among them. For a moment she hesitated. Her expensive suit, her refined manners, her whole sense of identity rebelled against sitting on the ground to eat simple food with poor children. But then she remembered the clay cup of water, the basket of corn, the stories of the peacock and the lion. She remembered the thousands of faces at the great gathering, the dignity in their eyes. Slowly, she knelt down and took her place among the children. When she picked up a clay bowl and took her first bite of rice, the children erupted in spontaneous applause. They laughed and clapped, their joy completely unforced and genuine. President Traoré said quietly, "Madam, this is true equality. When leaders and people sit together and share the same food, hunger disappears. Not just physical hunger, but the hunger of the spirit. All differences vanish in the act of genuine communion." Tears streamed down Madame Moreau's face. She could barely speak through her emotion. "I never imagined," she whispered, "that I would sit on the ground with children in poverty and feel that this moment is the most precious of my entire life. Everything I thought mattered, status, wealth, power, All of it is meaningless compared to this simple act of sharing. That evening, a small gathering was organized in the palace courtyard. Village elders, women, children, farmers, teachers, representatives of all segments of society assembled under the stars. President Traoré invited Madame Moreau to address the gathering. She stood, her legs shaking with nervousness, and began to speak. An interpreter translated her words into the local language. "I came to your country with arrogance," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I believed I knew everything. I thought I was here to teach you about civilization, about progress, about development. But you have taught me what true civilization means. You have shown me that dignity and respect are the greatest wealth any society can possess. You have demonstrated that unity built on mutual respect is stronger than any military force. You have proven that a people who honor each other, who serve each other, who sacrifice for each other, are invincible. I have been humbled not by your weakness, but by your strength. I have been defeated not by your poverty, but by your richness of spirit. I came as a teacher and leave as a student. I came with pride and leave with gratitude. I cannot promise that my government will change its policies immediately. I cannot guarantee that my country will suddenly see you as equals. But I can promise this: I will tell your story. I will bear witness to what I have seen. I will spend the rest of my life trying to embody the lessons you have taught me." The crowd erupted in thunderous applause. Women began to sing, children danced. An elderly woman stepped forward and embraced Madame Moreau. "Today," the woman said, "you have become our sister. Today you have shown that understanding can bridge any divide. Today you have proven that hearts can change." President Traoré placed his hand on Madame Moreau's shoulder. "Madame, this is the victory we all seek, not the victory of one nation over another, but the victory of understanding over ignorance, of dignity over arrogance, of peace over conflict. If the world could learn this lesson, there would be no more wars, no more exploitation, only mutual respect and cooperation." Madame Moreau bowed her head, overcome with emotion. The burden she had carried, the burden of superiority, of judgment, of prejudice, had been lifted. She felt lighter, freer, more alive than she had in decades. That night she wrote in her journal, "I came to Ouagadougou to learn about their need for development assistance. Instead, I learned about my own poverty, poverty of spirit, poverty of understanding, poverty of genuine human connection. They do not need us to save them. Perhaps we need them to save us, to remind us of what truly matters, to show us what we have lost in our pursuit of wealth and power. Power is temporary. Wealth is fleeting. But dignity lasts forever. This is the lesson of Ouagadougou. This is the truth I will carry home." The last morning in Ouagadougou arrived with a fresh, clear breeze that seemed to carry the scent of possibility. People gathered outside the palace, knowing that Madame Lucille Moreau would soon depart for France. Everyone could sense that the woman who had arrived days earlier, cold, arrogant, dismissive, had fundamentally changed. Her eyes no longer held that harsh certainty. Instead, there was a softness, a vulnerability, a newfound humility that made her seem more human, more real. President Ibrahim Traoré called her for a final conversation before her departure. She came carrying a letter she had written during the night. With trembling hands, she offered it to him. "Mr. President," she said, "I have written this to leave as a record of my transformation. Please read it to your people." The president took the letter and read it aloud, first in French, then having it translated into the local language. "I, Lucille Moreau, acknowledge that I came to this nation with arrogance and condescension. I believed I was here to educate and enlighten. But the truth is that I was the one who needed education and enlightenment. I have learned that dignity, patience, and love are the greatest treasures any society can possess. I have discovered that a poor woman's tears are more valuable than gold, that a child's smile is more powerful than any throne, and that a farmer's honest labor is the greatest investment in the future. I have seen unity that cannot be purchased, respect that cannot be commanded, and strength that comes not from weapons, but from the bonds between human hearts. I will never forget what I have learned here. I will spend the rest of my life trying to embody these lessons and share them with my own country. Thank you for your patience with me. Thank you for showing me the truth." Thank you for not responding to my arrogance with anger, but with the dignity that has now changed me forever." The hall fell silent as the president finished reading. Every person present felt the weight and authenticity of her words. President Traoré carefully folded the letter and spoke. "Madame, all human beings make mistakes. The true measure of character is not whether we err, but whether we have the courage to acknowledge our errors and learn from them. Today, you have taken that step. You have shown moral courage. This is not just your victory. It is a victory for all of humanity." At that moment, several children came forward carrying small gifts. One little girl presented Madame Moreau with a clay cup identical to the one she had drunk from in the village. "This cup will always remind you," the child said, "that dignity should never be rejected, that respect should always be given, and that we are all equal in our humanity." Madame Moreau knelt down and embraced the child, sobbing openly. The entire hall erupted in applause and cheers. As Madame Moreau's convoy made its way to the airport, people lined the streets. They waved, smiled, and called out blessings. These were the same people she had ignored when she arrived. But now she saw each face, acknowledged each person, felt connected to them in a way she had never felt connected to anyone before. At the airport, standing beside the plane, Madame Moreau turned one last time to President Traoré. "Mr. President," she said, "I came here with the arrogance of power. I leave with the treasure of dignity. This treasure will benefit my country as well if I can find the courage to share it honestly." President Traoré replied, "Madame, the treasure of dignity does not diminish when shared. It multiplies. If you can bring this lesson to your country, then this has been a victory not just for Ouagadougou, but for all of humanity. Go in peace. And remember, we are not your inferiors or your superiors. We are simply your fellow human beings on this earth." Madame Moreau bowed deeply and boarded the plane. As it took off, she watched through the window as Ouagadougou grew smaller below her. But in her heart, it had never been larger. After Madame Moreau's departure, the story of her transformation spread like wildfire throughout Ouagadougou. In markets and mosques, in schools and homes, in fields and workshops, people retold the tale with pride and satisfaction. Elders shared it with children as a lesson in the power of dignity. Mothers told it to daughters as proof that truth always prevails. Teachers used it to demonstrate that patience and respect are stronger than anger and force. Radio stations broadcast songs about the visit. Poets composed verses celebrating the victory of dignity over arrogance. Artists painted murals showing the moment when Madame Moreau drank from the clay cup offered by a child. The phrase echoed everywhere. Dignity is the greatest wealth. Several weeks later, a letter arrived from France. Madame Lucille Moreau had written, "What I learned in Ouagadougou has become the most precious lesson of my life. I now tell my country's children the same stories your elders shared with me. I speak about dignity and respect in every meeting I attend. Many of my colleagues think I have lost my mind, but I have actually found it for the first time. I hope that one day the world will understand that dignity and respect matter more than power and wealth. I hope that nations will learn to see each other as equals rather than as superiors and inferiors. I hope that the lesson of Ouagadougou will spread across the earth. Thank you for transforming me. Thank you for your patience with my arrogance. Thank you for showing me what it means to be truly human." President Traoré read this letter to a public gathering. The crowd erupted in joyful celebration. An elderly man stood and declared, "This is our true victory, that even those who came to look down on us have been forced to acknowledge the truth. Dignity cannot be defeated. Respect cannot be destroyed. These are the foundations of all genuine human civilization." From that day forward, the story became part of Ouagadougou's national identity. It was taught in schools, commemorated in annual celebrations, and passed down through generations. Whenever a child asked about true wealth, parents would tell this story. Whenever young people wondered about the source of real power, elders would recount these events. Whenever anyone faced arrogance or disrespect, they would remember how President Ibrahim Traoré had defeated pride not with anger, but with unshakable dignity. The lesson echoed through the years and across borders. Power is temporary. Wealth is fleeting. But dignity lasts forever. Those who respect others earn eternal respect. Those who serve others gain eternal strength. This is the way of true civilization. This is the path to genuine human progress. This is the wisdom of Wagadu. And so the story lived on, a testament to the truth that the greatest victories are won not on battlefields, but in human hearts transformed by dignity, respect, and love. The end.